The helicopter's rotors hadn't even stopped spinning when the first RPG streaked across the night sky. The explosion lit up the compound walls in orange and white, showering the landing zone with debris and turning what should have been a routine medical evacuation into something much worse. Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison hit the ground running, his team of Navy SEALs spreading out in practiced formation, weapons up, eyes scanning for threats that were already too close for comfort. "Get the medic to the casualty," Morrison shouted over the chaos. "We've got maybe 5 minutes before this place gets overrun." That's when Lieutenant Ariana Brooks stepped off the Black Hawk mid-30s, average height, wearing standard-issue combat fatigues with a medical crosspatch prominent on her shoulder. She carried an oversized medical pack that looked like it weighed half what she did, and her rifle hung at an awkward angle like she wasn't quite comfortable with it. In the red-tinted darkness, she looked exactly like what her file said she was, a Navy nurse attached to the platoon for this deployment, someone who'd spent more time in operating rooms than firefights. "Doc, we need you inside now!" Sergeant Mills called out, gesturing toward the compound where their wounded man was holed up with 3 other operators. Ariana nodded and followed Mills through the compound gate, moving with careful steps that suggested someone trying not to trip over her own gear. Behind them, the rest of the SEAL team established a defensive perimeter as automatic weapons fire began to pepper the walls. The enemy, whoever they were, had been waiting for this moment. Inside the compound, the situation was worse than the radio traffic had indicated. Staff Sergeant Kyle Richmond lay on a blood-soaked stretcher, his left leg mangled from an IED blast. 2 other SEALs, both sporting fresh wounds, had dragged him into this half-collapsed building and called for extraction. The 4th man, Petty Officer Davis, was at the window returning fire with controlled 3-round bursts. "About damn time," Richmond groaned through gritted teeth when Ariana knelt beside him. "No offense, Doc, but I'm bleeding out here." "None taken," Ariana replied quietly. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, cutting away his pant leg, assessing the damage with quick clinical precision. "You're not bleeding out. You've got a solid hour before that becomes a problem, but let's not test that timeline." Outside, the firefight was intensifying. Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. "Contact multiple hostiles north and east sides. They're trying to flank us." Ariana worked on Richmond's leg with steady hands, applying pressure bandages and starting an IV line while explosions shook dust from the ceiling. She seemed completely focused on her patient, oblivious to the chaos erupting around them. Mills watched her with a mixture of admiration and concern. He'd seen combat medics work under fire before, but something about her calm seemed almost unnatural. "Doc, you ever been in a firefight this hot?" Mills asked, chambering around as movement caught his eye through a gap in the wall. "Once or twice," she said, not looking up from Richmond's leg. "Hand me the morphine from the red pouch." Mills complied, but his attention was split between the medic and the deteriorating tactical situation. Outside through the window, Davis was burning through magazines at an alarming rate. The muzzle flashes outside were multiplying, converging on their position from 3 sides. Morrison's voice came through again, strain evident. "We're getting pressed hard here. Whatever you're doing in there, speed it up." 2 minutes, Ariana called back, her tone still maddeningly calm. She injected Richmond with morphine, adjusted his IV, and began wrapping his leg with compression bandages that would hold until they could get him to a surgical suite. Her movements were economical, precise, exactly what you'd expect from a Navy nurse with years of experience. That's when the compound's eastern wall exploded. The blast threw Mills backward, his ears ringing, vision swimming. Through the smoke and dust, he saw figures pouring through the breach. Dark shapes with rifles, moving with the aggressive confidence of fighters who thought they had their enemy trapped. Davis tried to engage but took a round to his plate carrier that knocked him down, gasping for breath. Mills scrambled for his weapon, knowing with sick certainty that they were about to be overrun. There were too many hostiles, too close, and half his team was wounded. He raised his rifle, ready to sell his life as expensively as possible. Then Ariana Brooks stood up. What happened next would be analyzed, debated, and eventually classified by intelligence officers who couldn't quite believe the after-action reports. But for Mills, Watching from ground level with dust still clearing from his eyes, it looked like watching someone flip a switch. The awkward, gear-laden medic who'd stumbled off the helicopter was gone. In her place stood someone who moved with the fluid lethality of a trained killer. She reached into her medical pack and drew out a weapon that definitely hadn't been visible before. A compact HK-416 with a custom suppressor, the kind of weapon that special operations units favored for its reliability and stopping power. The rifle came up in one smooth motion, no longer hanging awkwardly, but suddenly looking like a natural extension of her body. She fired twice, and the first hostile through the breach dropped before he could bring his weapon to bear. She transitioned to the second target without pause, her movements so fast they seemed almost choreographed. 2 more shots, 2 more hostiles down. The third fighter managed to get off a burst of automatic fire that went wide, bullets impacting the wall behind her. Ariana didn't flinch. She simply adjusted her aim by fractions and put 2 rounds center mass. "What the?" Davis started to say, but she was already moving. She flowed toward the breach like water running downhill, the HK-416 tracking smoothly from target to target. A hostile appeared in the gap, AK-47 already aimed in her direction. She shot him 3 times before he could pull the trigger, then pivoted and engaged a target Mills hadn't even seen yet, someone trying to flank through a window on the left. The firefight should have been suicide. She was moving through a fatal funnel, exposing herself to multiple angles of fire, doing everything the tactical manuals said would get you killed. But somehow, impossibly, her enemies kept missing while her bullets found flesh with mathematical certainty. "Mills, get Richmond ready to move," she called out, her voice still calm, but now carrying an edge of command that made him scramble to obey without thinking. "Davis, covering fire on my mark!" She dropped to one knee and changed magazines with a speed that seemed to defy physics. Her old magazine hit the ground before the new one was already locked home. Through the breach, Mills could see more hostiles gathering, at least a dozen fighters preparing to rush their position. "Mark!" Ariana shouted. Davis, despite his confusion and bruised ribs, opened up on full auto, spraying bullets through the breach. Under the cover of his fire, Ariana pulled something from her vest, a fragmentation grenade that Mills was certain hadn't been there a moment ago. She cooked it off for 2 seconds, then sent it through the breach with the kind of accurate throw that professional baseball pitchers would envy. The explosion was followed by screams. Before the dust could settle, Ariana was moving again, this time toward the window where Davis had been firing. She flowed up to the opening, the HK-416 ready, and immediately engaged 3 targets in rapid succession. Each shot was deliberate, controlled, final. There was no spray and pray, no wild shooting. Every bullet had a purpose, and every purpose was fulfilled. "Holy shit," Davis whispered, watching a woman who was supposedly a nurse systematically clear the enemy from their perimeter. "Who the hell is she?" Outside, Morrison's voice crackled with confusion and renewed hope. "What's happening in there? We've got hostiles breaking off, falling back." Ariana keyed her radio with one hand while working her rifle with the other, dropping a fighter who'd been trying to low-crawl toward their position. "This is Brooks. Compound is secure. Preparing to move casualties to the LZ." "Brooks, what? How did you—" "No time, Chief. We've got a window. Let's use it." She turned to Mills and Davis, and for a moment they saw her eyes clearly in the dim light. They were the same eyes that had looked at Richmond's wound with clinical detachment, but now they carried something else. A cold assessment that made both SEALs unconsciously straighten up. "Richmond goes first," she said, slinging the HK-416 with practiced ease. "Mills, you take point. Davis, rear guard, I'll carry the patient." "Doc, he's got to weigh 220, Mills protested. "Let me—" Ariana bent down and lifted Richmond in a fireman's carry with a grunt of effort but no sign of struggle. The wounded SEAL, drifting on morphine, managed a weak laugh. "Guess she works out," he mumbled. They moved through the compound with Ariana directing their path with quiet commands that somehow carried absolute authority. The firefight outside had indeed shifted, with Morrison's team pressing their advantage against an enemy that suddenly seemed less coordinated, less confident. Through gaps in the walls, Mills caught glimpses of bodies, more than he would have thought possible from such a brief engagement. They reached the landing zone just as the Black Hawk's pilot was preparing to abort the extraction. Morrison's team provided covering fire as they loaded Richmond, then everyone piled in, weapons still pointing outward, expecting the enemy to make one final push. But the push never came. The hostile forces had pulled back, broken, scattered by the sudden reversal of fortune. As the helicopter lifted off, Mills found himself staring at Ariana, who had returned to her role as the quiet nurse, checking Richmond's vitals and adjusting his IV with the same calm competence she'd shown before everything went sideways. "Doc?" Mills started, then didn't know how to continue. She glanced at him, a slight smile touching her lips. "Yes, Sergeant." "What? I mean, how did you—" "Do my job," she finished for him. "That's all I did. Kept the patient alive and got everyone home." Morrison, listening from across the cargo bay, couldn't stay silent. "Lieutenant Brooks, I think we need to have a conversation when we get back to base." "If you'd like, Chief," she replied mildly, returning her attention to Richmond's leg wound. But Morrison noticed what Mills had seen. The HK-416, now properly slung, had custom modifications that weren't standard issue. Her gear, arranged with perfect efficiency, showed signs of use that went far beyond a deployment or two. And most tellingly, there were no tremors in her hands, no signs of adrenaline dump, no indication that she'd just experienced one of the most intense close-quarters battles of the deployment. The flight back to base was filled with confused silence from the SEAL team, broken only by the helicopter's rotors and Richmond's occasional groans. Every operator was processing what they'd witnessed, trying to reconcile the stumbling nurse who'd arrived with the lethal operator who'd saved their lives. Davis leaned close to Mills and whispered, "Did that really happen? Did a Navy nurse just kill like 20 guys in 2 minutes?" "More than 20, Mills replied quietly, his eyes never leaving Ariana. "I counted at least 30 bodies in and around that compound, and she only used 2 magazines." At the base medical facility, Ariana helped transfer Richmond to the surgical team, providing a detailed handoff that demonstrated her medical expertise was absolutely legitimate. She spoke in precise clinical terms, answered the surgeon's questions with confidence, and seemed every bit the competent Navy nurse her records claimed she was. But Morrison caught her in the hallway before she could disappear into the officers' quarters. "Lieutenant Brooks," he said, keeping his voice low. "A word." She turned, her expression neutral. "Of course, Chief." He led her to a quiet corner away from the hustle of the medical facility. For a long moment, he just studied her, trying to see past the facade to whatever truth lay underneath. "I've been a SEAL for 15 years, Morrison finally said. "I've worked with every special operations unit in the U.S. military, and a few that technically don't exist. What I saw tonight, that wasn't a nurse defending herself. That was an operator working." Ariana met his gaze without flinching. "I'm not sure what you mean, Chief. The way you moved, the way you shot, the way you gave orders like someone used to command." He paused. "Who are you really?" "I'm exactly who my records say I am," she replied calmly. "A Navy nurse with combat trauma training, attached to your unit for this rotation." "Your records also say you've never served in special operations." "That's correct." "So where did you learn to shoot like that, and where did that HK-416 come from?" A slight smile. "Quantico, I qualified expert marksman. It's in my file. As for the weapon, equipment manifests can be... Expert marksman doesn't account for combat reloads under fire. It doesn't explain tactical movement. It sure as hell doesn't explain..." "Chief Morrison," she interrupted gently, "sometimes people have skills from previous careers, previous lives, and sometimes those skills are useful in unexpected situations." She paused. "Richmond's going to make a full recovery, by the way. Clean amputation, minimal secondary damage. He'll be running again in 6 months." Morrison recognized a deflection when he heard one, but he also recognized when he'd hit a wall. "Fine, keep your secrets, but I need to know one thing. Can I count on you if things go bad again?" "You could always count on me, Chief. That's why I'm here." He watched her walk away, still trying to make sense of it all. Later that night, he pulled her service record, reading every detail 3 times. Navy nurse, commissioned 5 years ago. Medical degree from Johns Hopkins, specialty in combat trauma. No gaps in service, no classified assignments, no indication of anything unusual. But buried in her civilian education history was a note he almost missed. Bachelor's degree in international relations from Georgetown, graduated 12 years ago. There was a 2-year gap between that degree and her medical school enrollment. 2 years that were simply marked as private sector employment. Morrison had been in the intelligence community long enough to recognize a cover story when he saw one. Nobody went from international relations to nursing school without a compelling reason. And nobody learned to shoot like Ariana Brooks from a pistol qualification course. He made a call to an old friend at JSOC headquarters. "I need you to do me a favor. Check on a name for me. Lieutenant Ariana Brooks, Navy nurse currently deployed with SEAL Team 7. "What am I looking for?" "Anything that might be, interesting." 3 days later, his friend called back. "Morrison, where did you get that name?" "She's attached to my unit. Why?" "I can't tell you much, but I'll say this. If she's operating under that identity, it means someone very high up wants her there for a reason. Don't ask questions you don't want answered." "Is she dangerous?" A long pause. "Only to people who threaten her patients. Leave it alone, Chief." But Morrison couldn't leave it alone, especially after the second incident. 2 weeks later, the SEAL team was tasked with securing a rural compound suspected of housing a high-value target. Intelligence suggested minimal resistance, maybe a handful of guards, nothing the team couldn't handle. Ariana wasn't supposed to be on the mission at all, but when one of their corpsmen came down with food poisoning at the last minute, she volunteered to fill in. "Just stay with the security element," Morrison told her during the pre-mission brief. "We don't expect casualties, but if something happens, we'll bring them to you." "Understood," she replied, with that same mild tone that somehow made him uneasy. The mission went wrong from the start. The minimal resistance turned out to be nearly 50 well-armed fighters dug into defensive positions. The SEALs found themselves in a sustained firefight within minutes of insertion, taking fire from multiple directions. Morrison's team was pinned down near the main compound building when he heard Ariana's voice on the radio, calm and professional. "Chief, I'm moving to your position." "Negative. Stay with. Already moving. ETA 2 minutes. He wanted to order her back, but his attention was consumed by the immediate threat of being flanked by an enemy machine gun team. His men were burning through ammunition, and their air support was still 15 minutes out. They needed a miracle. What they got was Ariana Brooks. She appeared through the smoke and chaos like a ghost, the HK-416 in her hands looking like it belonged there. She moved with the same lethal grace Morrison had seen in the compound, but this time, he got to watch her work from start to finish. She flowed through the battlefield with an almost supernatural awareness of where threats would appear before they materialized. A fighter popped up from behind cover, RPG on his shoulder. Ariana shot him before Morrison could even call out a warning. Another hostile tried to flank from the right. She dropped him with 2 quick shots while maintaining forward momentum. It was like watching someone play a video game on easy mode, except the bullets were real, and every target was a human being who would have killed SEALs if given the chance. She reached Morrison's position and immediately assessed the tactical situation with a glance. "Machine gun nest, 12 o'clock, 2nd floor. That's what's pinning you." "I know, but we can't get an angle on it." "I can." Before he could respond, she was moving again. What followed was 12 minutes of the most precise, lethal combat marksmanship Morrison had ever witnessed. Ariana worked her way through the compound with methodical efficiency, engaging targets with 2 or 3 shot bursts that never missed. She didn't take chances, didn't show off, just moved from position to position, eliminating threats with clinical precision. The machine gun nest fell silent when she put rounds through 2 fighters in rapid succession. A group trying to organize a counterattack scattered when she dropped their leader and 2 others in less than 5 seconds. Every time the enemy thought they had her position figured out, she was already somewhere else, striking from an unexpected angle. Mills, watching from cover, kept a mental count of her shots versus confirmed kills. By the time the shooting stopped, he'd counted 47 enemy casualties. 47 in 12 minutes in close-quarters combat against an entrenched enemy. When the dust settled and the SEALs secured the compound, they found the evidence of her passage everywhere. Bodies clustered in defensive positions, each one taken down with surgical precision. Spent brass that told a story of constant movement and aggressive positioning, and in the middle of it all, Ariana, calmly treating a wounded SEAL with the same detached competence she'd shown from day one. Morrison found her in the compound's courtyard, bandaging a superficial wound on Petty Officer Jackson's arm. "You're going to be fine," she told Jackson. "Bullet went clean through. Keep it clean and it'll heal without complications." "Thanks, Doc," Jackson replied, still looking at her with something between awe and fear. Morrison waited until she'd finished with the patient, then pulled her aside. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at her with a mixture of confusion and frustration. "You can't keep doing this," he finally said. "Doing what, Chief?" "Pretending to be something you're not." Ariana's expression didn't change. "I'm exactly what I appear to be, a Navy nurse who knows how to defend herself and her patients. 50 confirmed kills in 12 minutes isn't self-defense. I counted 47, she corrected mildly, and they were all actively trying to kill American service members. That makes it defense in my book." Morrison ran a hand through his hair, struggling to maintain his composure. "Who are you really? CIA? Some kind of special activities division? Delta?" "I told you, Chief, I'm a nurse. Nurses don't move like that. They don't shoot like that. They don't—" He stopped, choosing his words carefully. "I've worked with the best operators in the world. What I just watched you do puts you in that category, but if you're really just a nurse, then I'm the Pope." Ariana was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh something in her mind. When she spoke again, her voice carried a different quality, still calm, but with an edge of something harder underneath. "Chief Morrison, has it occurred to you that maybe someone decided your team needed a little extra insurance for this deployment? That maybe someone very high up in the command structure thought it would be useful to have someone with certain specialized skills embedded with your unit? So you admit it. I admit nothing. But hypothetically, if such a person existed, they would probably appreciate not being forced into situations where they had to reveal capabilities that are meant to stay hidden. They would prefer to do their actual job, keeping people alive, rather than having to shoot their way through enemy positions." Morrison processed this. "So tonight was me doing whatever was necessary to keep my teammates from dying, same as you would have done in my position. But you're not supposed to be in my position. You're supposed to be medical support. And I provided medical support. Jackson's arm is bandaged, the others are stable. Richmond made it to surgery because I kept him alive long enough for extraction." She met his eyes directly. "Everything else is just details." Before Morrison could respond, one of his petty officers called out, "Chief, you need to see this." They found what the intelligence reports had missed, not just a weapons cache, but evidence of a major operation being planned against U.S. forces, documents, maps, communications equipment. The compound had been a command center, and its elimination would save American lives. "Looks like good intelligence paid off," Morrison said, examining the captured materials. Ariana stood nearby, her expression neutral. "Lucky break." But Morrison noticed how she wasn't surprised by any of the discoveries, how she seemed to know exactly what they'd find and where, and he realized with sudden clarity that this mission hadn't been about capturing a high-value target at all. It had been about eliminating a command structure, and someone had made sure they had the right asset in place to do it. "You knew," he said quietly, meeting her eyes. "You knew what was really here." "I knew what intelligence reported," she replied evenly. "Same as you." "That's not what I mean." She held his gaze for a long moment, then smiled slightly. "Chief, I think you're overthinking this. Sometimes a lucky break is just a lucky break. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have patients to check on." She walked away, leaving Morrison standing amid the evidence of a perfectly executed operation that officially had nothing to do with the Navy nurse who'd just saved his entire team for the second time in 2 weeks. The rest of the deployment passed without incident, at least by deployed standards. The SEAL team completed their assigned missions, rotated back home on schedule, and submitted after-action reports that mentioned Lieutenant Brooks's exceptional courage under fire, while carefully avoiding specifics that might raise uncomfortable questions, but Morrison couldn't let it go. On their last night before flying back to the States, he found Ariana on the base perimeter, watching the sunset over the distant mountains. "You're not going to tell me, are you?" he said without preamble. She glanced at him, unsurprised by his presence. "Tell you what?" "The truth, who you really are, where you came from, why someone with your skills is playing nurse with a SEAL team." Ariana was quiet for a long moment, her gaze returning to the mountains. "Chief, do you know how many people are working right now to keep Americans safe? Not just soldiers, but intelligence officers, analysts, support personnel, people in dozens of agencies with overlapping jurisdictions and competing interests. Sometimes those people need to operate in the open. Sometimes they need to stay hidden. Which are you?" "I'm someone who wanted to do something useful after spending years in places where useful meant things I'd rather forget. I went to medical school. I became a nurse. I joined the Navy to serve my country in a way that didn't involve—" She trailed off, choosing her words carefully. "Let's just say in a way that didn't involve some of my previous skills. But you still have those skills. Obviously, you can't unlearn training like that. It becomes part of who you are. But that doesn't mean I want to use it." She turned to face him fully. "What happened on this deployment, twice now, those were exceptions. Situations where people were going to die if someone didn't act. I'm not proud of it. I'm not ashamed of it either. I did what I had to do to keep my teammates alive." Morrison nodded slowly, finally understanding. "So what happens now? You go back to being a regular Navy nurse?" "That's the plan. Another year on my commitment, then I'm thinking about joining Doctors Without Borders. Take my skills somewhere they can do good without the shooting. They're going to want to medal you for this deployment. Then they'll have to do it quietly. I don't want attention, Chief. I just want to do my job and go home." "Fair enough." Morrison extended his hand. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you were there both times. My men are alive because of you." She shook his hand, her grip firm and professional. "That's all I wanted. Take care of them, Chief. They're good men. What about you? Who takes care of you?" She smiled, genuinely this time. "I've been taking care of myself for a long time. I'm pretty good at it." They flew home the next day. Ariana returned to her assigned medical unit, filed her deployment reports, and resumed her regular duties with the same quiet competence she'd shown before. The men who'd served with her told stories in bars about the nurse who'd saved SEAL Team 7, though the details got hazier with each retelling, memories clouded by operational security requirements, and the simple impossibility of believing what they'd witnessed. Morrison kept his promise. He didn't ask questions, didn't try to investigate further, but he kept the brass casing from one of Ariana's spent rounds, a reminder that sometimes the most valuable assets were the ones nobody knew existed. 3 years later, Morrison heard through the grapevine that Lieutenant Brooks had fulfilled her service commitment and left the Navy as planned. Last anyone heard, she was working with a medical NGO in South America, running a clinic in a region plagued by cartel violence. He hoped she'd found the peace she was looking for, but somehow he doubted that peace would find her. People like Ariana Brooks, whoever she really was, whatever shadows she'd emerged from, they had a way of being exactly where they were needed, when they were needed, whether they wanted to be or not. Morrison's final memory of her was at the departure terminal. She was in civilian clothes, jeans, a simple blouse, a backpack slung over one shoulder. She looked like any other traveler heading home after deployment. Nothing remarkable, nothing threatening. But as she walked past a group of rowdy contractors who were being loud and aggressive with the gate staff, Morrison saw it happen. One of them, drunk and belligerent, grabbed a young female sailor's arm. Before security could respond, Ariana was there. She didn't raise her voice, didn't make a scene. She simply touched the contractor's wrist in a specific way that made him immediately release his grip and stepped back, eyes wide with sudden understanding that he'd made a serious mistake. The sailor hurried away. Ariana continued toward her gate without breaking stride. The contractor rubbed his wrist and decided to sit down and be quiet. Morrison approached her before she could board. "You can't help yourself, can you?" She turned, a tired smile on her face. "Old habits. Those skills you mentioned wanting to forget. Do you really think you can leave them behind?" Ariana considered the question carefully. "No, but I can choose when to use them. I can choose to heal instead of hurt. That's the best I can do. And if trouble finds you again, in South America or wherever you end up, then I'll deal with it the same way I always have. Quickly, quietly, and with minimal collateral damage." She paused, her expression softening. "But I'm going to try really hard not to let it come to that. I'm tired, Chief. Tired of being the person who solves problems with bullets." "I get that. I really do." Morrison suddenly remembered something crucial. "Wait, your rifle, the HK-416. What happened to it?" Ariana paused, glancing back with that enigmatic smile. "What rifle, Chief?" "According to my equipment manifest, I only carried standard-issue medical gear and a sidearm." "But you saw a Navy nurse doing her job under difficult circumstances. That's what goes in the official record." She adjusted her backpack. "Equipment has a way of appearing when needed and disappearing when it's not. Logistics can be complicated in deployment zones." Morrison understood. The weapon had never officially existed, which meant it had been supplied through channels that didn't leave paper trails, channels that would have reclaimed it before she rotated home. Whoever had placed her with his team had thought of everything. "Of course," he said, "my mistake. It happens. Memory gets fuzzy after intense operations. The mind plays tricks." She turned to leave, then stopped once more. "Chief, if anyone ever asks about what happened out there, the compound, the firefight, remember that luck and adrenaline can make normal people do extraordinary things. That's a much simpler story than the alternatives." "Understood," she nodded. "Good luck, Lieutenant, or whatever your real rank is." She shook his hand firmly one last time. "Just Ariana now, and thank you for not digging deeper. Some stones are better left unturned. Take care of yourself out there. Always do." Morrison watched her board the plane, carrying secrets he'd never fully understand. The world was full of shadows, and sometimes the people who lived in them were the only thing standing between civilization and chaos. He'd met one of those people, fought beside her, and lived because of her skills. That was enough. Some mysteries were meant to stay unsolved. He headed to his own gate, already composing the sanitized version of events that would go into his official report. The truth would live only in the memories of the men who'd been there, a story they'd tell in quiet moments to people who'd understand why some details had to stay buried. The HK-416, like the woman who'd wielded it, had returned to whatever shadows they'd emerged from, and that's exactly how it was supposed to be. The wolf doesn't announce itself to the sheep, but sometimes, when the wolves are circling, you need someone who speaks their language. And sometimes that someone looks like the least dangerous person in the room, right up until the moment they prove exactly how wrong that assumption is. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories every day.